My world used to be four walls, a ceiling, and a floor, all held together by the aroma of simmering stock and baking bread. For 40 years, my identity was woven into the very fabric of that home, each thread a sacrifice, each color a compromise. I was Robert's wife. I was Michael and Sarah's mother. I was the keeper of schedules, the mender of clothes, the healer of scraped knees, and the architect of every single family meal since I was 20 years old. My day began before the sun, with the quiet hum of the refrigerator as my only companion. I'd plan the meals, thinking about what Robert's day was like, whether Sarah was feeling stressed at work, if Michael was eating properly now that he had his own family. My love was a language spoken in herbs and spices, in slow-cooked stews and perfectly risen cakes. It was a language I thought they all understood. My hands, stained with beet juice and smelling faintly of garlic, were the instruments of my affection. They had kneaded dough for thousands of loaves of bread, chopped an entire forest of vegetables, and stirred countless pots of the family's favorite soup. This soup was my masterpiece, a recipe passed down from my grandmother. It wasn't just food. It was heritage in a bowl. It was the cure for winter colds, the comfort after a bad day, the centerpiece of every significant celebration. I had spent a lifetime perfecting it, balancing the savory notes with a hint of secret sweetness, a complexity that I felt mirrored the love I poured into my family. My 60th birthday was supposed to be the culmination of that love, a testament to a life well-lived, a family well-raised. I didn't want a fancy party or expensive gifts. I just wanted them all there, under my roof, around the table I had set for them 1,000 times before. For a week I prepared. The house was scrubbed until it shone. Flowers were placed in every room, and the kitchen was a whirlwind of activity. The centerpiece, of course, was the soup. I let it simmer for 2 days, the rich, complex aroma filling every corner of the house. To me, it was the smell of home, of security, of love. They started arriving in the late afternoon. Michael with his wife, Jessica, who always seemed to look at my furniture as if it were a museum exhibit of a forgotten era. Then Sarah, with her husband, Tom, both of them tapping away on their phones before they even had their coats off. And finally, Robert, who came downstairs from his study looking as if the celebration was an interruption to his important work. I smiled, I hugged, I served drinks. I brought out the appetizers I had so carefully arranged. Their conversation was a flurry of topics I couldn't quite grasp: stock options, weekend getaways to places I'd only seen in magazines, office politics. I felt like a spectator in my own life, a kindly caterer who had offered up her home for their convenience. When it was time for dinner, I carried the heavy tureen of soup to the table with a sense of pride. This was me. This was my heart, offered up in a porcelain bowl. I ladled it out, the steam rising, and watched their faces, waiting for that familiar look of contentment. But it never came. Michael swirled his spoon in the bowl, a slight frown on his face. "Mom," he said, not unkindly but with a clinical distance, "this soup, it's a bit heavy, isn't it?" Jessica chimed in, wrinkling her nose delicately. "It's just, it has a very particular smell. A bit old-fashioned." My smile began to feel like a mass cracking. I looked at Sarah for support, but she was looking at Tom, a small, conspiratorial smirk playing on her lips. "She's right," Sarah said, shrugging. "It kind of smells like, well, it smells like old soup." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Old soup. Not classic, not heritage, not comforting. Just old. Stale. Past its prime. Robert, my husband of 40 years, the man I had built a life with, let out a short, sharp laugh. "She's got you there, love," he said, pushing his bowl away slightly. "Time for a new recipe, maybe?" And then they all laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, not a monstrous one. It was worse. It was a light, dismissive, thoughtless laugh. The sound of people who were moving on, who had outgrown the simple, homespun love I had to offer. They saw me not as the vibrant heart of the family, but as a relic, a faded photograph, the source of a musty, antiquated smell. They quickly changed the subject, moving back to their modern lives, their important jobs, their exciting plans. They ate a little of the main course, picked at the dessert, and then one by one they made their excuses. Michael and Jessica had an early start. Sarah and Tom had a friend's party to get to. Robert suddenly remembered an important email he had to send. Within an hour, they were all gone. They left behind a table littered with half-empty plates, a mountain of food, and a silence that was louder than any scream. I stood alone in my dining room, the scent of the soup now feeling like an accusation. They hadn't just insulted my cooking, they had summarized my entire existence in 3 words. Old.
Soup.
I sank into a chair, the vibrant colors of the party decorations suddenly looking garish and mocking. I was 60 years old, and I had become invisible. I had poured every ounce of myself into them, and they had looked right through me, wrinkling their noses as they did.
Naquele momento, meu chão desapareceu. Foi a dor mais profunda que já senti.
Se você já passou por uma grande decepção e entende o que é ter o coração partido, por favor, curta este vídeo para eu saber que não estou sozinha nesta jornada. The days that followed were a thick, gray fog. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was a physical presence, a weight that pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Robert moved around me with a careful, polite distance, as if I were a piece of fragile, antique furniture he was afraid of breaking. He didn't mention my birthday again. Neither did the children. There were no follow-up calls, no sorry we had to run off texts. It was as if the night had been erased from their memory, while for me, it was seared into my soul, playing on a loop. The phrase "smells like old soup" became the soundtrack to my life. I heard it when I looked in the mirror and saw the fine lines around my eyes. I heard it when I walked through the quiet, empty rooms of my house. I heard it in the dial tone when I'd pick up the phone to call Sarah, only to lose my nerve and hang up. I stopped cooking. The kitchen, once my sanctuary, became a place of ghosts. The gleaming pots and pans felt like relics of a life that was over. I lived on toast and tea, the effort of preparing a real meal feeling like a pointless charade. Who was I cooking for? The woman who had loved this work was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell who felt as worthless as they had made her feel. My world shrank until it was just me and the 4 walls again, but this time they felt like a prison. Robert's financial control, once a matter of convenience, now felt like another bar on the cage. I had a small allowance, enough for groceries and household expenses, but I had no real money of my own. I had given up my career as a junior librarian to raise the children, a decision I had never once regretted until now. Now I saw it as the ultimate act of foolishness, of handing over my power, my independence, for a love that had proven to be conditional and disposable. I was adrift, with no purpose and no resources. I spent weeks just sitting, watching daytime television without really seeing it, the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams the only lively things in the room. One bleak afternoon, driven by a desperate need to do something, I decided to clean out the attic. It was a place of forgotten things, a graveyard of my children's old toys and my own abandoned hobbies. As I sorted through dusty boxes, my hands came across a small, wooden chest that had belonged to my grandmother, the one who had given me the infamous soup recipe. I hadn't opened it in years. My fingers trembled as I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled amongst dried lavender and yellowed lace, was her old recipe book. I almost slammed the lid shut. The memory was too raw. But something made me pause. Beneath the book was a small, leather-bound journal. I had never seen it before. Curiosity, the first real emotion I had felt in months besides despair, pricked at my numbness. I opened the journal. The pages were filled with my grandmother's elegant, looping script, but it wasn't a diary of daily life. It was filled with notes, observations about scents. She wrote about the smell of rain on dry earth, the sharp, green scent of crushed tomato leaves, the heady perfume of night-blooming jasmine. And then I found it. Tucked into the back of the journal were pages detailing her youth. Before she married my grandfather, before she moved and became a simple farmer's wife, she had spent a year in Grasse, France, as a young apprentice to a perfumer. She had learned the art of extraction, of blending, of top notes, heart notes, and base notes. She wrote about how she applied these principles to her cooking. The soup recipe wasn't just a list of ingredients, it was a formula. The bay leaf was a top note, the first thing to hit the senses. The slow-simmered root vegetables were the heart, the warm, comforting core. And the secret ingredient, a tiny pinch of smoked paprika and star anise, was the base note, a deep, lingering warmth that stayed with you long after the bowl was empty. She hadn't been just a cook, she was an alchemist. She had been creating culinary perfumes. A tiny, fragile spark ignited in the cold, dark cavern of my chest. They had mocked the smell of old soup. But what if that smell, that art of scent, was not my end, but my beginning? What if the very thing they used to humiliate me was actually a secret legacy, a hidden power I never knew I possessed? That spark, as faint as it was enough to push me out of the fog. I took the journal and the recipe book down to the kitchen. For the first time in months, I didn't see a room full of painful memories. I saw a laboratory. I began to read, not just my grandmother's words, but everything I could find online about perfumery, about aromatherapy, about the chemistry of scents. I learned about volatile organic compounds, about enfleurage and distillation. I spent my small allowance not on bland groceries for one, but on exotic spices, essential oils, and strange, fragrant herbs. My kitchen started to transform. Jars of star anise, cardamom pods, and lavender buds lined the counters. Small glass vials replaced the family mugs. The air, once stale with neglect, was now thick with the heady, sometimes bizarre, scents of my experiments. I started with the soup. I deconstructed it, following my grandmother's notes. I played with the balance, enhancing the top notes with a bit of lemongrass, deepening the base with a whisper of black cardamom. It was no longer just old soup. It was a symphony of aromas, complex and surprising. But I didn't stop there. I moved beyond the soup. I began creating spice blends based on the principles of fragrance. A sunrise blend with citrusy coriander, bright ginger, and a warm, amber-like base of turmeric. A midnight blend with smoky black pepper, mysterious juniper, and a lingering hint of clove. I made mistakes. So many mistakes. I created blends that were overpowering, that smelled medicinal, or just plain wrong. I burned expensive spices. I wasted precious oils. Robert would walk into the kitchen, wrinkle his nose, that same dismissive gesture, and ask what on earth that strange smell was. Each time it was a small cut, but I refused to bleed. His opinion no longer mattered. I wasn't doing this for him. I wasn't doing it for my children. I was doing it for me, and for the ghost of a grandmother I now felt I knew intimately. After months of relentless work, of trial and error, I had a small collection of unique spice blends and scented culinary oils. They were my creations, born from my pain and my rediscovered heritage. With trembling hands, I created a simple website, took photos of my little jars with my old phone, and gave my small venture a name: The Alchemist's Pantry. I told no one in my family. This was mine. For weeks, the only visitor to my website was me. The silence was deafening. I started to think it was all a foolish dream. Then, one Saturday, I gathered all my courage and rented a small table at a local farmer's market. I sat there for hours, my jars lined up, feeling exposed and ridiculous as people streamed past, heading for the familiar cheese and bread stalls. Just as I was about to pack up, a young woman with a kind face and chef's jacket stopped at my table. She picked up a jar of my forest floor blend, a mix of wild mushroom powder, thyme, and a hint of pine. She opened it, inhaled deeply, and her eyes widened. "Wow," she breathed. That's incredible. It smells like a walk in the woods after it rains." She bought a jar. It was my first sale. $15. I held the cash in my hand, and it felt more valuable than any check Robert had ever signed. It was mine. It was validation. The next week, the chef came back. She told me she had used the blend on a risotto at her restaurant, and people were going crazy for it. She bought my entire stock. That was the first real sign, the first proof that my spark could become a flame. I started helping people, not by slaving away to fill their bellies with obligatory meals, but by offering them a small jar of magic that could transform their own cooking. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in decades, a purpose that was entirely my own. My little online store started to get orders. First 1 or 2 a day, then a dozen. The food blogger who frequented the young chef's restaurant wrote a piece about the mysterious risotto and my little-known spice company. The orders exploded. I was working 18-hour days, grinding spices, blending oils, packing boxes, and teaching myself about shipping logistics and inventory management. The house was no longer a silent prison. It was a bustling headquarters, fragrant with the smell of my success. I was no longer the invisible woman. I was the alchemist.
Foi ali, com as minhas próprias mãos, que comecei a reescrever a minha história. Deixei de ser a vítima e me tornei a autora do meu destino. Se a minha jornada de superação está te inspirando, inscreva-se no canal para acompanhar os próximos capítulos e fazer parte desta comunidade de recomeços.
By the time November arrived, my life was unrecognizable. The alchemist's pantry had become a modest, but very real, success. I had hired a part-time assistant to help with packaging, and my products were being featured in several boutique food shops across the country. I had moved my operations out of my kitchen and into a small, rented commercial space. For the first time in 40 years, I had my own bank account, filled with money that I had earned. The feeling of independence was intoxicating, more potent than any perfume I could create. With that independence came clarity. I looked at my life with Robert, at the polite, empty shell of our marriage, and I knew it was over. There was no dramatic fight. I simply told him I was leaving. The look on his face was not one of heartbreak, but of pure, bewildered shock. It was as if his favorite armchair had suddenly announced it was moving out. He couldn't comprehend it, but I was firm. I used my own money to rent a bright, modern apartment in the city, a place that was mine alone. I filled it with new furniture, with art, and with the beautiful, complex sense of my work. It smelled of hope. And then, as the holidays approached, the past came knocking. It started with an email from Sarah. "Hi Mom, been meaning to reach out. Things have been so crazy. I saw your little spice business was featured on a blog. How cute. Anyway, we were all thinking we should do a proper family Christmas this year at your place just like old times. Let me know what you want me to bring, though you know I'm useless in the kitchen." A few days later, a call from Michael. "Mom?
Hey.
Jessica and I are so proud of your little hobby. It's great you're keeping busy. So, about Christmas, we're all on board for coming to you. We'll clear our schedules." The final blow was a visit from Robert. He showed up at my new apartment, looking lost and out of place. He brought a bouquet of cheap gas station flowers. He said he had made a mistake, that he missed me, that the house was too quiet. He said he wanted to come home for Christmas. They had heard the distant ringing of my success, and like Pavlov's dogs, they came salivating, not for me, but for what I represented: comfort, tradition, a home-cooked meal, a mother to absorb all their needs and demands. They wanted old times. They wanted the woman they had discarded to magically reappear and serve them. I agreed to see them. Not in my new home, my sanctuary, but at my old house, the one Robert still lived in. The place where my heart had been broken. When I walked in, he had tried to make it look festive, but it just looked sad. The air was stale, missing the life I had once poured into it. Michael, Sarah, and their spouses arrived, all smiles and forced enthusiasm. They complimented my success in the way one compliments a child's macaroni art. "It's amazing what you can do online these days," Tom said condescendingly. They sat in the living room, expecting me to head to the kitchen, to put on my apron and my familiar role. I remained seated. "So, about Christmas," Sarah began, clapping her hands together. "I was thinking you could make your famous soup." I held up a hand, and the room fell silent. "I'm glad you're all here," I said, my voice steady and clear, a voice they hadn't heard before. "Because I have something to say. For my 60th birthday, you all sat at my table and told me that my love, the love I had spent my life putting into my food, smelled like old soup. You dismissed me. You made me feel worthless. You threw me away." Their faces shifted from feigned warmth to discomfort. "Oh, Mom, it was just a joke," Michael mumbled. "We didn't mean it like that," Sarah added quickly. "No," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "You meant it. You just didn't expect there to be consequences." I turned to Robert. "Our marriage has been an empty room for years, and I'm done pretending it's a home." Then back to my children. "You are welcome to have Christmas together. But I will not be here. I will not be cooking. I will not be serving. The woman who did that for you is gone. You broke her. And from those broken pieces, I built someone new." I stood up. "My lawyer will be in touch, Robert. Children, I hope you have a lovely holiday." I walked out of that house, out of that life, without looking back. There were no tears, no anger. Just a profound, quiet sense of peace. My worth was no longer up for their debate or approval. My legacy is not in a family that took me for granted. It's in the small jars of spice that travel to kitchens all over the world. It's in the emails I get from customers who tell me my blends have brought joy back to their cooking. It's in the woman I see in the mirror now, a woman who is vibrant, independent, and the sole author of her own life. This Christmas, I am not in a cold house, serving people who don't see me. I am in Dubai. I am sitting on the balcony of a beautiful hotel, overlooking a glittering city that seems to rise out of the desert like a mirage. The sun is warm on my skin, and the air smells of exotic perfumes, of sand and sea and possibility. I spent my Christmas day on a yacht, sailing on the turquoise waters of the Arabian Gulf. I am not running from a painful past, but celebrating a future I created for myself. The old soup they despised was a gift. The betrayal was not an ending, but a violent, necessary beginning. It forced me to find the secret ingredient I never knew I had myself.